we are finishing up a series at the end of November here. We participate in a series every year about generosity, exploring what it looks like to maintain a posture and characteristic of generosity, regardless of where we go or where we are. Tonight, we're finishing up that series. This particular year, we've been talking about 4 enemies to generosity. We talked about envy, which is wanting something that someone else has and resenting them for having it. We've talked about greed, which is holding on too tightly to the things that we have, regardless of if it's a lot or a little. We talked about gluttony last week, which is the overconsumption or overuse of any one thing, regardless of quantity. And tonight we'll talk about sloth. Sloth, like gluttony, is not a word that you probably use very often, if at all. It's not something you would use to describe anyone you know, probably, or yourself. Even if you know somebody who might be slothful, or you yourself might be slothful, it's just not a word that's in our common vernacular. And so we're going to explore it a little bit tonight, try to understand it a little bit better. Unfortunately, there's an animal going by the same name that just happens to be very slow, and we've mistaken slowness for slothfulness, and it's not the same thing. Or we've minimized slothfulness to be laziness, and although there is an element of laziness and slothfulness, I think it's more complex than that, and I think it's found its way into our lives in other avenues, and so I want to explore those as well. Tonight, I'm going to try to do 4 things in our short time together. First, I'm going to talk about what sloth is not. Then I'm going to talk about what sloth is. And then I'm going to talk about what sloth does to generosity. And finally, I'll talk about what generosity does to sloth. And I'll move quickly through these things. We put as much on the screen as we possibly can. So hang in there, take pictures, take notes, whatever you want to do. I'm going to begin with what sloth is not. And I'm going to read a passage from Matthew. These are the words of Jesus to start us in this section. In chapter 11, it says this, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The first thing I want you to know about sloth tonight is that it is not depression. It is not fatigue. Sloth is not depression. Some of you are experiencing depression right now for a variety of reasons. For some of you, it's circumstantial. Something very painful or difficult has happened to you, and you're experiencing depression as a result. For some of you, it's seasonal, right? It's the fact that it's 5:30 p.m. and it's pitch black outside and it's cold. And that's hard for you every single year that comes around. Or it's the holidays, right? The holidays remind you of something. Maybe it's a reminder of a broken relationship. It's a reminder of an addiction. There's some sort of a relapse that sort of comes around every year during the holidays. For some of you, it's chemical. It's literally a chemical imbalance in your brain that causes you to experience chronic or intermittent depression. And I want you to know that Jesus' posture towards you is not one of condemnation or conviction, but it's one of compassion. He says, I want you to come to me, and I'm ready to trade yokes. Mine is easy. I will give you my levity and trade you for your gravity. That is what Jesus' posture is towards you. And I know that doesn't fix your depression, that doesn't make it all go away, but I want you to know that that's his posture towards you and his invitation to you. And so my encouragement to you is if that's what you're experiencing, you should talk to somebody in your table group, somebody sitting next to you, talk to me about it. We'd love to set up an appointment with you to hear more about that from you. But I want you to know tonight that as we're talking about sloth, we're not talking about the depression that you might be experiencing. Sloth is also not fatigue. Sloth is not being tired. It's okay to be tired. We're tired when we work hard, or we're tired when we don't rest enough, or maybe both, a combination of the two. That's when we experience fatigue, and you're not wrong for being tired, okay? So that's not the slothfulness that we're talking about tonight either. So now that we've talked about what sloth is not, let's talk about what sloth is. If you go through the book of Proverbs, you'll see sloth mentioned in several different parts, and oftentimes it's referring to a particular person who is slothful. And this person is referred to as a sluggard, okay? Which is also not a word you use very often, but if you say it enough times, you start to think of a slug. And so we have sloth and sluggard and slugs, and it's the slurring of these words that gives us the sense that this is a slothful thing. This is a slow thing. This is a lazy thing. It's almost in the language itself. And so in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 4, it says this, "Sluggards do not plow in season. So at harvest time they look, but find nothing." At harvest time they look and they find nothing. Slothfulness makes little to no progress or progress in the wrong direction. Okay? Little to no progress or progress in the wrong direction. Sloth ignores opportunity. So slothfulness is when there's an opportunity, there's something that comes around regularly, like a harvest in this case, and because the harvest wasn't done at the appropriate time, the person who is supposed to do it is standing there entitled going, why didn't I get the thing that I wanted or the thing that I deserved? Even though they didn't do anything to get it. And I think that in our lives, in 2018, in the United States of America, the things that we experience, because we don't live, we live in the city, right? Like we don't harvest and we don't plow and we don't really plant and we don't really do that. So I've been looking for what is the way that sloth shows up in our lives? When sloth comes knocking, what does it look like in our lives? And I've come up with 3 things that I think might help us discover how we see sloth: missed opportunity or ignored opportunities, no progress or progress in the wrong direction. The first is this: sloth is apathy. Apathy is laziness and ambivalence. It's a combination of the two, typically, sometimes one, sometimes the other, but oftentimes a combination of the two: laziness and ambivalence. Laziness is a lack of action when action is necessary. Okay, laziness is not is seeing an opportunity and seeing the possibility and then not taking action when it is presented to us. Ambivalence is a lack of care when something is of importance. One is about action, the other is about care. Will Willimon says this: sloth is that sin that is midway between all the things that drag us down in human life and all our attempts to pull ourselves out. It is that demon that jumps at us at noon. It is that midday demon that makes us feel apathetic, like nothing really matters, we don't really care, or we lack the ability or the care to do anything about it. Now, the opposite of apathy isn't pretending that we care about things that don't really matter. So those of you who are really high-strung and you think that you're caring about all these things that don't really matter, that's like somehow the opposite of apathy. That's not the case. You're just high-strung, okay? The opposite of apathy, however, is generosity. It's acting with care towards those with need. Acting with care towards those with need. That is the opposite of apathy. It is a form of generosity. Second, sloth is nihilism in our day and age. Nihilism is a combination of godlessness and purposelessness. Now, I want to say something for a minute about godlessness, or I'll use the term atheism here, and I want to be really careful and clarify what I say in just a second. So I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to say it again, so we're really clear on what I said and what I didn't say. Atheists are hard-pressed to make a clean argument for meaningfulness. Okay? Atheists are hard-pressed to make a clean argument for meaningfulness. What I didn't say was that I think that atheists are dumb or dismissible, okay? I actually resonate with a lot of the arguments and things that atheists tend to say. Okay, so if you're listening to the podcast or if you're listening right now and you're thinking, this guy doesn't like atheists, it's not what I said, that tends to get misconstrued. I want to be really clear here that I think that it is hard, without a God that designs things with meaning and purpose, to claim that things have meaning and purpose. It's very difficult to make a clear argument for that. And so, atheism doesn't provide that clean answer, and so this godlessness of nihilism makes it difficult for us to find purpose in things. Dorothy Sayers says this: sloth is the sin which believes in nothing, cares for nothing, seeks to know nothing, interferes with nothing, enjoys nothing, loves nothing, hates nothing, finds purpose in nothing, lives for nothing, and only remains alive because there's nothing it would die for. This is the nihilism of sloth. Purposelessness is like it, although you can be a theist and be purposeless in that it's hard to find purpose in things or in the work that you do. Believing that the things that you do, the generous acts that you participate in, don't really make a difference. They don't really help elevate people out of their situation. The opposite of nihilism isn't pretending to care about things that don't matter. Remember that one? Same one as apathy. It's not just being high-strung about everything. That doesn't actually mean the opposite of nihilism. The opposite of nihilism is seeing the God-given dignity, value, and humanity in every person and then treating them with the generosity that they deserve. The opposite of nihilism is generosity and seeing dignity in human beings. Third and last, sloth is busyness. This is the one that's going to throw us for a loop because they seem to be opposing, right? They seem to be juxtaposed. This seems to be an oxymoron of sorts. Sloth is busyness. Busyness is procrastination and self-importance, okay? Procrastination being doing everything other than the thing that actually needs to be done, right? You can be very busy and accomplish nothing. You can be very busy and produce nothing. You can be very busy and make absolutely no progress whatsoever. Self-importance comes when we believe that simply being busy adds to our self-worth. This is why when people say, how are things going? You say, oh, I'm really busy. Even if you're not, because nobody says, man, nothing's really going on. I'm just kind of hanging out. Because you would immediately feel like you're not that important, like you're not that cool. Even if that's the case, we lie and say, I'm busy. That's what we say. Frederick Buechner says, a slothful man may be a very busy man, but he is a man who flies on autopilot. This is the sloth of busyness. The opposite of busyness is not apathy, to circle all the way back around to the first one. The opposite of busyness is stewardship. It's generosity through stewardship. That is the opposite of busyness. Now, around here, we bifurcate stewardship. We talk about it in two different ways because we see mainstream culture talking about stewardship in one way, and we think that's maybe half the equation at best. So we talk about stewardship in terms of managing and leveraging. You manage the things that you have. You protect them. You make them grow. You help them make progress. That's a good thing. You should do that. But then you leverage the heck out of them for the sake of God and others. That is the work of stewardship. What we think of as stewardship so often is I'm going to invest everything I have in a mutual fund, and then when I retire, I'm going to have a bunch of money. And that's fine. You should invest in mutual funds. This is not me giving you financial advice. My point is, the second half of stewardship is when we say, how do I leverage the heck out of that for the sake of God and others? Because when I just keep it to myself, that's actually hoarding that I have called stewardship, and it's not the same thing. Now, let's talk about what sloth does to generosity. If you were to apply sloth to generosity, what happens to it? Again, in Proverbs, we see more about this. So in 19, verse 15, it says, laziness brings on deep sleep, and the shiftless go hungry. Another way to say that would be laziness brings on death, and the shiftless starve to death. In short, what sloth does to generosity is it kills it. Literally and figuratively, sloth can kill. Sloth can kill your career. It can kill friendships. It can kill marriage. It can kill your spirituality. It could even kill you. Apathy, nihilism, or busyness, taken to their extreme, could actually be fatal, right? But for our argument tonight, sloth kills generosity. Apathy kills generosity. It draws our attention to personal comforts, and it isolates us from other people. Think about a time when you've been apathetic towards something or someone. You draw away from it. You withdraw, right? It kills your generosity or the chances of your generosity. Nihilism kills generosity. There's really no point in us serving anybody because we can't really help them anyways, right? The thing I do for my neighbor, the couple dollars I give to that one person, maybe even opening up my home to somebody in need, it doesn't really help them because maybe they're going to squander it or who knows, they're stuck in some sort of cycle of poverty and there's nothing I can do about it. Or maybe I myself am stuck in poverty and there's nothing I can do, and so I'm just going to live in that. There's really nothing that can be done. Nihilism kills generosity. Busyness kills generosity. It distracts us from the needs of others. It literally just serves as this distraction. We've got all this stuff to do. We're very self-important. We have this thing to go to and that thing to go to. I run down to the grocery store to grab maybe something to eat for lunch or maybe something for a party or an event that I have coming up in the holiday season, and I pass a few of my neighbors who are in need for a variety of different reasons, and it's so easy to ignore them because I have plans and I have stuff to do and I'm busy, and it kills my generosity. Lastly, what does generosity do to sloth? Like, what if we were to flip the script, right? What if we took generosity and that became the weapon of choice? We've said all along in this series that envy and greed and gluttony and sloth, these are violent enemies to generosity. They dismantle our generosity. They keep us from being generous. But what if, at the end of the series here, we flip the script and we think about applying generosity to these things? Well, in Psalm 41, there's something interesting that happens in other places in the Bible as well, but I think this encapsulates it pretty well. It says this: blessed are those who have regard for the weak. What that means is there's blessing for those who consider the vulnerable. There's a blessing for you when you consider those who are in need. The Lord delivers them in times of trouble. The Lord protects and preserves them. They are counted among the blessed in the land. He does not give them over to the desire of their foes. The Lord sustains them on their sickbed. He restores them from their bed of illness. You see, generosity brings blessing to both the receiver and the giver. Now, the blessing that you receive by being generous is not a healthy motivation for being generous, but it is a byproduct. It is a result. We choose to be generous because our Father is generous, and as his daughters and sons, we want to show the world what he is like. That is why we are generous. But a result of our generosity, a byproduct of our generosity, is blessing. So when we apply generosity to sloth, we experience blessing, and so does the person that we're being generous towards, or the organization we're being generous towards. That posture provides blessing in both directions. When we apply generosity to apathy, our attention is redirected away from ourselves and it educates us about the needs of other people because it takes us from isolation to connectivity. And once we're connected, we can actually learn about the things that the people next to us in the seats right now need and how we can care for them. When we apply generosity to nihilism, we turn the meaninglessness of nihilism on its head. I mean, think about if you've been in a situation where you're like, nothing really matters and I really can't make a difference anyways. If you were to practice generosity, even like a fake it till you make it sort of generosity, you will start to see the meaning and the purpose in the people that you're caring for. You will start to see that, I promise you that. When we apply generosity to busyness, we realign our priorities towards stewardship. If we start to think about things in terms of managing and leveraging, and how do I make sure that this thing, I can maximize it for the sake of someone else? You see, generosity can become the weapon, not the victim, if we're willing to see it that way. So when we're faced throughout the next, really between now and the end of the year, we're going to be faced with all kinds of things. Certainly envy, greed, gluttony, and sloth. Those things will just be like knocking at the door between now and the end of the year and beyond, if we're honest. But what if we weaponize generosity to combat those things rather than their generosity becoming the victim of them? Now, one thing that you may have been feeling throughout this series, and maybe even tonight, is like we've been talking for a full month about taking care of other people. Like, what does it mean to take care of the folks at Bishop? What does it mean to take care of our neighbors who are in need? What does it mean to take care of the people here on Sunday nights at community dinner or at church or whatever who have needs? What does that actually look like? And sometimes when we start talking about that over and over and over again, the tendency in our minds is to start thinking, well, like, I can do that to an extent, but I've got to have boundaries, right? I have conversations with people all the time where we're like, I'm a yes person. I say yes to way too much, and I need to start saying no to things. And I get that. I totally get that. But sometimes that's misguided. Sometimes the reason why we're like, oh man, I need to stop saying yes to caring for people is because we think that caring for ourselves and caring for other people are in opposition to each other. We believe in this false dichotomy that you can either care for yourself or you can care for other people. When in reality, that's not the case. They're not opposing ideas. They're things that can happen simultaneously. Remember in Psalm 41. In Psalm 41, we see that generosity is both self-care and others' care at the same time. 2 birds, 1 stone at the same time. The command of Jesus was not love yourself and then love your neighbor when you're finished loving yourself. It's love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor while you're loving yourself. Love yourself while you're loving your neighbor. These things happen concurrently and simultaneously. There's overlap and integration. These things are the same thing oftentimes. I'm not saying throw your boundaries out the window. I'm saying think creatively about the things that you do for both yourself and the people around you. The integrated life does not require that you pit 2 things together, 2 things against each other. Rather, the integrative life means putting things on parallel tracks and doing them concurrently. That is what generosity offers to us, I think, throughout this series and tonight. You see, generosity, I believe, can redeem envy, greed, gluttony, and sloth. Even as those things are warring against generosity, we can flip the script and use that to fight against those things. We can make it a weapon and not a victim. The posture of generosity for our church, especially coming into the season of Advent, is extremely important. Whether it's Bishop or the Christmas campaign, or serving at Christmas Eve at the Gothic, or the variety of other things that we're going to be doing, we're going to be asking a lot of you, and I believe that you can do it. I think you can be stretched this season and be okay because generosity allows you to extend yourself beyond maybe what you ever had imagined before. That's my hope for you. Would you stand with me now as we pray our generosity prayer? All that we have received from God. We bring nothing into this world, and we take nothing out of it. We choose to follow the way of Jesus and increase in generosity until it can be said, there is no one in need among us. We choose to resist envy, greed, gluttony, and sloth as these plunge our hearts to ruin. We choose to be faithful stewards of all our resources, relationships, time, possessions, and money. We choose to be generous because our Father is generous, and as his daughters and sons, we want to show the world what he is like. Amen.